A very good evening. The first meeting of finance ministers and central bank governors under India's G20 presidency has just concluded, and we have with us Madam Finance Minister and Minister for Corporate Affairs, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman, Governor RBI, Dr. Shaktikanta Das, Secretary DEA, Government of India, Shri Ajay Seth, and Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. V. Anant Nageshwaran. So the drill would be, first there would be Madam FM's address, followed by questions, and I'll be announcing the names of the journalists who will be asking the questions. Please.
Good evening. Thank you very much. You've been here all the 3 days and really closely followed what has been developing. This is the first and probably the only one media interaction that we are having together at the end of the first G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meet. The objective of this FMCBG meeting is to seek guidance from the finance ministers and central bank governors on the areas of work that will be undertaken under the G20 finance track. It was a 3-day meeting in which 500 foreign delegates, including finance ministers and central bank governors from G20 countries, guest countries, and heads of various international organizations participated. There were only 4 countries whose finance ministers or central bank governors could not attend in person. They are China, Mexico, Russia, and Turkey. With that said, I would like to add that the virtual participation of some of these ministers and central bank governors also happened. So it wasn't as if they were not at all there. They were physically not here, they would participate virtually. India has always tried to make efforts to be a voice of the South, global South. And you know the Honorable Prime Minister much before our presidency commenced, a month after that in January, held a consultation with all the global South countries in a virtual mode, and therefore we have taken it upon ourselves, like always before, to voice the key concerns of developing countries. We did that even in this meeting. We have certainly given priority for India's neighborhood, but not stopping at that, we have also invited to give a voice to the global South. We have invited and brought to the table of the G20 participation of some countries who we've invited in the G20 India presidency's first FMCBG meeting. I'll just name those countries. From our immediate neighborhood, it was Nepal and Bangladesh. From Africa, Senegal, Morocco, Egypt, and Nigeria. From the Middle East, Oman, and from the Indian Ocean countries, Mauritius. So these countries have been invited to be, as a guest country, to be participating. And they did attend the meeting. the 3-day meet began, the first day was the deputies meeting, and 24th and 25th were the ministers and the governors meeting. And that started off with a video message from Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi. The Prime Minister urged, and I'm just giving a one-line summary or a highlight of what the Prime Minister's video message said, calling the finance ministers and the central bank governors as custodians of the leading economies and monetary systems of the world. Honorable Prime Minister urged us to bring back stability, confidence and growth to the global economy. That was the gist of his video message. And of course, guided by the theme which is given for the G20 India presidency, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, One Earth, One Family, One Future. The discussions were looking at holistic solutions for most of the pressing global issues. Broadly, 3 thematic sessions were held. They were chaired jointly by myself and also by the Governor of the Central Bank of India, which is the Reserve Bank of India. The first one of the 3 thematic sessions is strengthening the multilateral developmental banks to address shared global challenges of the 21st century so that they can address global debt vulnerabilities, mobilize timely resources and adequate finance for that was the first one. And the second one is to deal with the sustainable development goals, for which mobilizing finances for climate action was the main focus. And the third thematic session was to look at digital public infrastructure, also look at sustainable cities for tomorrow, and financial inclusion and productive gains, all of which were focused items of the 3 thematic sessions. Ministers and governors reiterated the need for a well-calibrated monetary, fiscal, financial and structural policies in order to promote macroeconomic and financial stability and also to maintain growth momentum. On the margins, we had a high-level symposium on digital public infrastructure on the 23rd itself. And that particular high-level symposium was to look at various issues governing the digital public infrastructure. The particular matter of interest which I'd like to put before you is the G20 Troika members. It so happens that the Troika members, Indonesia, Brazil and India, had shared their success stories in the DPI, digital public infrastructure. While the interest was there among all countries, the success stories were incidentally from the Troika. So that was a matter of interest for all members, and it was also very heartening to know all the 3 are emerging market economies. Today we had a walk the talk policy in action, where the delegates were taken to the Indian Institute of Sciences, and a total of 53 delegates came for the visit. 7 of them were finance ministers or heads of international organizations, 9 central bank governors, and 37 delegates participated in it. There was a very good display, and in fact I must say, even during the course of the session, 3rd session of the afternoon today, several of those members of the delegates who came over had words of praise to say. It was one of those very, very effective visit, meaningful, and they had a lot of takeaways for them to carry back to their home countries. because they felt at one go they could have a lot of strides that the Indian startups have made displayed for them to see, and also from the Indian Institute of Sciences, which has been patenting a lot of their products. Once in 5 days, I'm told, they have 2 registration for patents. Every 5 days, they register 2 patents. That was one of the things which was mentioned during our visit. And I'll just give the range of items which were displayed there, explained for the delegates. India's electronic vehicle system, electronic vehicles and ecosystem, semiconductors, biotechnology and healthcare, aerospace, artificial intelligence, robotics and drones. The various developments which are happening in all these areas were displayed. In fact, the President of European Central Bank, Finance Minister of Netherlands, G20 Finance Deputy of the USA, Vice President of the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, all of them thanked the Presidency for having made this arrangement for visiting the Indian Institute of Sciences. Each one of them, during the course of the discussions, mentioned that it was time well spent, and they mentioned a special word of thanks. Progressing further, there was a seminar on policy perspectives debating the road to policy consensus on cryptocurrencies. This seminar was also of great interest for most members who participated. That was held on 23rd February. It was to deepen the discussion around crypto assets and to foster better understanding of the broader implications of crypto assets. Then, continuing the theme of crypto, there was a panel discussion on leveraging national payment systems to enhance cross-border payment arrangements. It also had inputs on what happens to the cryptocurrencies which banks have bought out, like the way India's Reserve Bank has also come up with pilot for both retail and for wholesale use of cryptocurrencies, that is. CBDs, central bank driven currencies. Then there was a third event in which crypto could play a role. That event was the SME financing and bridging the gap, which was also organized for the delegates. So all of them have been well attended, well received, and there's a lot of discussion about it. On the debt vulnerability, the IMF, World Bank and the Indian Presidency co-chaired and hosted a meeting of the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable on the sidelines of the meeting. The objective of this debt roundtable is to bring together a diverse group of stakeholders to share their views and to coordinate and collaborate on global debt policy issues. Participants also of the roundtable comprised of official bilateral creditors, the Paris Club Secretariat, debtor countries, and also the private creditor representatives. All of them had participated. This is possibly the second meeting, I think. Just 1 minute. I'll give you greater clarity. There was one meeting held in February on the 17th with the deputies talking on the debt vulnerabilities on the round table. And today was the one with ministers attending it. So on the round table, which is being organized by the IMF and the World Bank, there are 2 meetings which have already been held, inclusive of today's. Then, of course, other than the meeting itself, we've had a cultural event in which we are in Karnataka, I'm happy to say the rich cultural grandeur of the Vijayanagara kingdom was displayed. It's actually, we called it Uttada Mele Sambhashanagalu, which is over a meal, particularly a dinner, there was a lot of discussions. So that was very reflective of the Karnataka culture, the food, the culinary variety which were provided were all reflective of Karnataka, the state in which this is being held. And so the Uttada Mele Sambhashanagalu was a very interesting and well-received cultural event with the food reflecting the state. There was also a display which was there for the last 3 days on Chennapatna toys, saris, brown cotton, which is unique to Karnataka, Kasuti embroideries, Chittara, the arts, and so on. Other than that, the CBDC had a display stall where you could go and test for yourself as to how the CBDC works. So that was one very interesting thing which most ministers wanted to go and try. I went and tried it from my end. Although I know the Reserve Bank of India's headquarters in Mumbai, there is even a fruit vendor at the ground on the streets close to RBI who uses the digital currency. So that was also an experience offered by us here. There were several fintechs and the Aadhaar-based stalls also, which could really be showcased. Tomorrow, there is a little trip-long excursion which is being offered, taking any member of the delegation wanting to go to Nandi Hills, which is close by, Shravanabelgola, which is one of the world's very unique sites where the tallest statue of Mahavira, the Jain founder of the Jainism, is also there, and Bengaluru, Halabedu. So all this, if I can call it as a brief summary of what has happened. I'm not getting into, at this stage, maybe I'll explain it a bit later about my personal engagement, bilateral and other things that I had attended to. But overall, when today the chair's summary and outcome document was taken up, I did mention it when I was introducing the chair's summary. I would like to say that as my concluding opening statement before you have any questions to ask. I am very grateful that India's presidency has received strong support on all our key priorities, has received strong support on all our key priorities, and therefore I'm very thankful to all the ministers and the central bank governors who participated today. India particularly got support for our proposal to bring in an expert panel who will go into looking and providing a narrative. They'll develop a narrative for an updated vision of the MDBs, and that can make the MDBs capable of addressing transboundary challenges and also for better development financing mandates that can be fulfilled. So that expert group was a proposal which was given by India. It has received, it has received support from all member countries. And just for information's sake, the expert group has been mandated to submit their report in 3 months' time, so that in the July meet, we will be able to take up the discussions and any follow-up action that may be required. And on that particular expert group, I'm indeed grateful to the US Secretary, Janet Yellen, who had really come forward, putting her support up front. Then the key successes of the negotiation, the team had done a really rigorous work, and I was glad to hear a lot of finance ministers praise the work of the Indian negotiating team. Each one of them came to me to say you have a fantastic team which has gone through the negotiation process, and the team leaders, Ajay Seth, Secretary, Economic Affairs is here. He led the team, and really they had gone through a consultation process without any kind of meeting difficult moments. Even if they were able to bring everybody on board. So that was one of the things. And on one of the successes for the negotiation, particularly for the Chair's summary and the outcome document, was to have arrived at a common position on the debt language. That is a key one which sort of stretched till this morning, but I was glad when a common position has been arrived on that language. And it is important for us to emphasize on that, because the vulnerable countries are looking up to the G20 to find some solution, some kind of arrive at a position whereby their debt stress can be relieved. And many of them have been waiting for a very long time. So if we could arrive after so much of negotiation at a common position for a language on dealing with debt, I think the G20 is now standing up to meet the challenges of debt stress which many countries are facing. And this is a development which I think really reflects at the responsiveness and also taking up the responsibility of giving solutions, which the G20 group has always shown, and they have not failed this moment, this time either. So they stood up to the challenge, arrived at a consensus language, and as a result, on a very, very stressful issue of debt stress and countries really being on the cliff, we had to come up with a solution, and I'm indeed grateful that the G20 membership rose to the occasion and arrived at a common language. So 4 specific countries would benefit by a quick response from the international institutions, and the G20 has actually today paved the way for it. There was also a consensus on stepping up the implementation of the common framework. So that was one thing. And finally, before I conclude, I just want to say, I mentioned it during the session, Saudi Arabia had really come up with a kind of, from its own, came up to help on the discussions when it was on macroeconomic consequences of food and energy insecurity, because there was one reservation they had, but they came up and cleared it, and I'm thankful for them, because food insecurity, fuel insecurity is something which is worrying globally all countries, and for them to have come up saying, all right, we'll come in with our own, we'll join the team in getting a consensus. UK and USA, I'm grateful again for being very supportive on the global coordination framework, particularly on the crypto. China and Saudi Arabia again for coming forward on climate finance mobilization. They have been very, very proactive and came forward. Japan and United Kingdom, on all priorities of the Indian presidency, they've been completely supportive. So I'm indeed very grateful to them. And the G20 Troika, similarly, have been completely supportive of India's position and priorities, all India's priorities. So these were reflected with full consensus in our statement. So finally, I'm indeed very thankful to all the members. In a way, before the next meeting, which is in April in Washington, this first step, although there was what you would call not a chair or not a communique, but only an outcome statement, I would still think we've made good progress in having all the ministers on board. This would be my opening statement. Would Governor Das want to say something before we open the floor for questioning?
The Finance Minister actually has very comprehensively covered all the aspects. I just wish to add 2 or 3 quick points. One is that, by way of information, that from the Reserve Bank of India, we organized 4 side events. And the 4 side events were on cyber security, on payment systems, that is cross-border interoperability, then on financial inclusion, and the 4th one was on MSME credit. That's the first point I wanted to say. The second point is that by coincidence or whatever, the India-Singapore, the linkage between UPI and Pay Now really came at, at the right, most appropriate time, and that attracted a lot of attention. In fact, during the deliberations, quite a few finance ministers and central government, central bank governors did mention about it as a success story and which can guide the future of interoperable payment systems between countries and for cross-border transfer of money. And the third aspect I wanted to point out was that the gallery of various stalls which we had put out, that included the showcasing of the UPI by the NPCI, the CBDC stall which we had put up, and it was being run by the commercial banks, both public and private sector banks, and that attracted a lot of attention, as the Finance Minister has pointed out. And we were actually, the third aspect was there was a stall where we were actually enabling the foreign visitors access to make UPI payments, use the UPI and make local payments even if they did not have bank accounts. This was one of the announcements which we had made in the last monetary policy meeting, and that was that has been operationalized. It was on demonstration and it was an actual functioning. And then also there was a stall on the trades platform and how it's making progress. I'll stop here. Thank you.
So, Mr. Shishir Sinha, Hindu Business Line.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, sirs. Ma'am, my question to you, when you said that we have arrived on a consensus on language on the debt thing, but this morning, U.S. Secretary of Treasury Yellen, ma'am, said that there are differences. So with the kind of differences what she's talking, how we are going to see the debt resolution for the vulnerable countries?
This morning's statement is before the consensus which has been arrived. So there are no divergences now. On the debt issue, we have come to a same page.
Mr. Arup Roy Chaudhary.
Minister, Governor, good evening. Ma'am, in the press conferences preceding you over the past few days, finance ministers of Germany, France, US, Japan, and others, they said that that they will protest any step back if the communique does not adopt the same language on Russia which the Bali leaders' declaration did. And that language was adopted in the chair summary. If that has been agreed to, why is it that we have a chair summary and not a communique, ma'am? What are the reasons for that?
Only because the Bali paragraph, paragraph 3 and 4, which is exactly what the Bali Leaders Summit had come up with, was introduced, but 2 countries had a reservation. So, with a footnote, certainly a communique can't go out. And therefore, it had to be a chair summary and an outcome document. Russia and China.
Mr. Akram, Indian Express.
And that was mentioned also in the council, in the G20 meeting that we had. My introduction about the chair's statement, I did mention the name of the countries there as well.
Mr. Akram from the Indian Express.
Were there any discussions on this Hindenburg report that...
Sorry?
Were there any discussions on the Hindenburg report? Like, did any leaders from...
No.
talk to you about this?
No.
Mr. Takashi Ishihara from the Asahi Shimbun.
Hello, can you hear me? My name is Takashi from the Asahi Shimbun Japanese newspaper. I just would like to clarify. So you mentioned that China and Russia oppose the paragraph 3 and 4 to make the consensus among the G20 countries. So if Russia and China agree on that paragraph, can I understand the communique can be approved? And then number 2, which specific point on paragraph 3 and 4 Russia and China oppose to make the consensus for this time?
They didn't want those two paragraphs to be in the communique because it was all agreed by all countries except for these two. And what did they not agree? They didn't agree to those two paragraphs because the leaders had prepared that in the Bali summit, and it was fine for a circumstance, for the circumstances which prevailed then. And therefore now they didn't want it.
Mr. Ajay Mishra from Doordarshan.
You can sit down and ask because there are cameras behind you.
Hello. Yes. Thank you, ma'am. By when can we expect this common solution for debt vulnerabilities to come, ma'am? And also, who are the 4 countries that are going to benefit when it comes? Also, what are the reactions from the countries from global south, which we see as a priority for Indian presidency? Thank you very much.
Well, the solutions for the debt-distressed countries are all already on the works. It wasn't as if, it is not as if it has to start now. They've already on the works, but it's also a question of all debtor countries participating in it so that they can effectively give the resolution. The 4 countries that we are talking about are Chad, Ghana, Suriname and Sri Lanka.
Ms. Janani from the BQ Prime. Here.
I think there are some questions on the left side also.
Good evening, ma'am. Ma'am, you had mentioned that there's been a lot of support for a proposal for developing an expert panel on the narrative of an updated vision for multilateral development banks. Could you maybe help us understand what would be this expert panel's directives to look at? What would be the outcome to be expected from them?
See, first of all, we are talking about reforming the multilateral development banks in such a way that the reforms would make them far more nimble-footed so that the 21st century challenges and also meeting the development needs of many of the countries can be better met. For which, I know in the World Bank some action has already commenced. Now, we are not reinventing the wheel here. This expert group, incidentally, let me give the name of the co-chairs. Professor Larry Summers would be the chair of this, and it has 2 co-conveners, that is Larry Summers and Professor N.K. Singh, Professor Mr. N.K. Singh, who's been a senior bureaucrat and now is the head of the Institute of Economic Growth. So the other 2 members will be co-opted by the 2 co-conveners. So they will be working in order that we know. Just before I get into this answer, a bit of a correction. The 4 countries that we planned, that we talked about are Ghana and Sri Lanka, which I mentioned is right. Because Chad probably has already had a resolution given, it's not Chad, it's Zambia and Ethiopia. So Ghana, Sri Lanka, Ethiopia and Zambia are the 4 countries. Yeah, so the terms of reference and everything would be more to see how the multilateral development institutions can better leverage the monies that they have for raising more funds and also be more nimble-footed in dealing with the development needs of countries, and what management efficiencies can be brought in, and so on. So that's exactly what is going to be the work of the expert group. They'll submit the report, as I said, in a matter of 3 months, and the G20 FMC, I always get difficulty in saying, central bank governors, finance ministers and central bank governors meet, will the next time round look, that is in July, look into the reports and take action forward.
Ms. Deepshika, Economic Times.
Ma'am, just on the debt resolution, there have been concerns about asset capture especially with regard to sovereign debt in these countries and geopolitical concerns around the asset capture. So the framework that we are now looking at or working out this outcome, will it address these concerns?
I'm not getting to the details of how it has been resolved. The details will come out for you, but we are looking at more efficient and quick resolution. The sheer fact that countries have to wait for years, like for instance Zambia had waited for more than a year and a half, and there have been countries which went back on the request because they waited for 2 years. So those sort of, first of all, the process itself consuming the time, by which time the distress in the country aggravates. Like for instance Sri Lanka, it is waiting for a resolution, but in the meanwhile, because of the delays, they're feeling the stress even more. So it is more from the point of view of getting all the creditors to the table, both sovereign and also private creditors to the table, and having all of them agree to a certain formulation in which there needs to be a greater efficiency and also coordination among all the all the creditor countries, and sometimes even non-sovereign private funders also will have to be joining in this table. That is why when IMF and World Bank held the round table at the deputies level in February 17th, if I know right, all of them participated. In the sense, Exim Bank, the central bank, also the private creditor, all of them were brought onto the round table, and therefore you are now able to see that that is one of the very critical aspects of resolution, debt resolution for countries which are so stressed.
Mr. Dipankar from the PTI.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, sir. Ma'am, since a lot of thrust was on regulation, on private cryptocurrency, and there were 3 seminars which were held on that count, what sense did you get from a member nation? Are they looking for total ban for private cryptocurrency, ma'am? Or what is the road ahead for private cryptocurrency?
I'll actually ask the governor to speak about it, but I'm glad to say one thing. There's almost a clear understanding that anything out of the central bank is not currency. And this is a position that India has been taking for a very long time, and we are glad that such a position of India is now getting also acknowledgement from so many different members. I wouldn't want to take more of your time reading the quotes which had been coming out today in the meetings. I'm just referring to several speakers, not just in today's meeting, but also outside, who have been speaking about the risks of crypto assets outside. And there is a clarity that unless it is sovereign backed, it cannot be a currency. And as it is, that they have to be regulated. And many of them did come to me to say that the technology which governs all this, the distributed ledger technology, and in some nations the coins, the units, the Bitcoin and stablecoin and so on. People recognize that the technology behind all this is very useful for fintech, and even that position is now being reiterated by many other countries. But Governor Das.
2 points. First thing is that there was greater interest in central bank digital currency, and pilot projects are already in operation in quite a few countries. The second point is that there is now wide recognition and acceptance of the fact that cryptocurrencies or crypto assets or crypto products, or by whatever name you call it, they involve several major risks to financial stability, to monetary systems, to cybersecurity issues, and to overall financial stability. As I mentioned, that they involve several risks and they need to be looked at. And going forward, the effort is to develop an international framework, an international architecture to deal with this problem of these crypto assets or products or whatever you call it. The IMF and the Financial Stability Board both are working on it. The IMF is working on a paper. The FSB has been dealing with this issue. FSB focuses more on regulatory aspects. So there will be a synthesis paper between the FSB, Financial Stability Board, and the IMF on this whole issue of crypto that will come up in the later part of this year, and they will form the basis for the future discussions to develop an international architecture.
Just a few more things on the crypto since there's so much interest. I have already said that in February, the IMF's discussion paper on macroeconomic implications of crypto assets has already been put on the table, so people are looking into it. February 23rd, there was this panel discussion on policy perspectives, debating the road to policy consensus on crypto assets. That was already held. Now, forthcoming events in the context of G20 and crypto, I'd like to mention it now. April 2023, when we'll meet during the spring meeting of the World Bank and the IMF, side events are proposed on crypto assets, even there in Washington. July 2023, FSB's paper on crypto asset regulation will be also put on the table, so that when we meet in July, we'll be able to talk about it. So IMF's paper is already on board. FSB's paper is coming in July. And the synthesis paper, which the governor referred to, will be during our presidency in September this year. The synthesis paper also will be submitted, and which will lead towards a creation of a global policy approach on this matter. So step by step on crypto, there's enough work going on. As I said, 2 of them have already happened, meetings where this was discussed. 3 are awaited. I mentioned the 3. One is the April meeting 2023 as a side event, July FSB's paper, and September the IMF FSB's synthesis paper, all which will lead to some kind of a policy approach in dealing with the cryptos.
Ms. Nivrita Ganguly, AFP.
And just to add, Canadian Central Bank Governor cautioned that crypto assets should not be given the regulatory seal of approval. He used these words. I just want to draw your attention to that. Without a well thought out approach and a framework for implementation. These are, I'm paraphrasing his words, that was Canadian Central Bank. The World Bank stated that the views of all the developing countries should also be included in any policy framework. That was from the World Bank. The ECB, European Central Bank, thanked India for putting crypto assets on the priority map and stated that the global framework and understanding of macro implication, financial factors, is very, very fundamental. So the EU Commission also stressed that an internationally coordinated approach is the key. So I'm glad that all that we have been discussing in India over the last 1.5, 2 years, in the process of addressing you all several times, broadly has an acceptance in the G20 membership as well.
Good evening, ma'am.
Can I just add one sentence? You know, I said that there is now wide acceptance about the risks involved. And as the finance minister pointed out, you know, about more than a year ago, or let's say 2 years ago, in the international community among countries, there was still a feeling that there could be some advantages and it's a new product, it's a new innovation. But now I think there is a wide recognition of the risks involved. It is accepted that there are major risks, there are concerns being expressed, and various options of dealing with this problem have also been pointed out, as the finance minister quoted a few governors, and there have been other governors and ministers. So there have been other, in private bilateral discussions also, several other opinions are coming. So this is something which is work in progress, and basically I think there was agreement that this issue has to be dealt with in the overall interest of maintaining financial stability, and we should not create major risks whose management later on becomes, insurmountable.
Good evening, ma'am. Nivrita here from AFP. I just wanted to understand what exactly was the breakthrough in the language on the debt recast topic. Who or what institution was opposing it? If you could give us some details on that. And also, similarly on the language of the paragraphs that Russia and China did not agree to, is it correct to say that China wanted the word war removed?
See, on the debt, across the table, there was unanimity that there's an urgency to address the debt vulnerability of low-income and middle-income countries. And I'm making that statement. It's there in the outcome document itself, across the board. Everybody said that needs to be done. Further, each one of them said that we have to step up implementation of the common framework, which was done in November 2020, and thereafter the progress so far has been on chart. So then appreciation, and rather the ministers impressed that all agencies have to work, everybody, all official bilateral creditors and the private creditors have to work towards finding an early solution to all of them. Then there were issues around that what is the transparency in the debt treatment, like when the IMF or the World Bank do a data or a debt sustainability analysis, which is called DSA, when that information can be shared, what is the transparency, whether that can be improved upon. There were discussions around, and the one part which was holding it out for long was whether the multilateral development banks should be part of the debt restructuring. So that's a fundamental issue on which China has a different view. And on the other hand, all other countries feel that it is something where the MDBs get a preferred creditor status, because only then they can retain the AAA status in the market for raising their debt, and then becomes a very low cost debt they can raise it. So a common language has been found, common understanding. Language is a reflection of the understanding. So what it has been found, that common framework itself provides for a solution, that more work needs to be done. So that's the way forward which was agreed upon.
Sorry?
So I mentioned it, that China's position, China was insisting upon that for some of the countries, or for several countries, debt given by multilateral...
She's asking about war. Did China want the word war removed?
Okay. No, see, both these countries, the language adopted, or not language taken from the Bali declaration, G20 Bali declaration, language has been taken from there. The only change is that the para there in the Bali declaration said this year we have witnessed a war. Obviously the year has gone by. So what the minister's communique or outcome statement is talking about, since February 2022 we have witnessed a war. So that's the only difference in point. both China and, I will start with Russia, both Russia and China took a position that finance minister and central bank governors, their mandate is to deal with economic and financial issues. They should not get into the global geopolitical issues. So they did not comment on the language part. They said it is not their domain, so they will not comment on the language part. So there is absolutely no change vis-a-vis what the leaders had agreed in the Bali declaration. So answer your question, there was no request or demand to remove the word war. They just removed the paragraph itself because this is not the right place for having those paragraphs. On the other hand, all other 18 countries felt that the war has got implications on the global economy. So this is the right place to have those paragraphs.
Mr. Prashant Sahu, Financial Express.
Hello. Ma'am, are you satisfied with the outcome of the meeting to address or to restore the global growth and price stability, and also to bring down the global food, fertilizer and fuel prices, which is affecting many countries, including India?
Well, at least the understanding among countries is now that the food insecurity and also the fuel insecurity is going to affect all of us. It's already affecting. And that is where I did mention about a little bit of hesitation which was in the Saudi Arabian mind has also been addressed, in the sense all of us do recognize that this insecurity is going to worry a lot of nations, and we've come on board.
Mr. Shailesh Yadav, ANI.
Ma'am, can we expect consensus among the G20 countries on crypto assets during Indian presidency?
Well, first of all, we are going through the study process so that there can be informed discussion. That is why you find that IMF and also the FSB, who have been doing their own little work on the crypto matter and progressing in that on their own. We have now asked them to do the papers and give it to us. And the rapidity with which these papers have been already one from IMF given and from FSB, which will be given in time for the July meeting, I feel that we are progressing in this direction, so something should develop.
Ms. Priyasmita Datta, Informist.
Good evening to everybody on the panel. This is Priyashmita. I wanted to know that what was the take of G20 nations on India's rupee-ruble trade settlement with Russia, especially with regards to oil, at a time when the G7 nations are so vocal about further sanctions and also taking actions against countries which will violate those sanctions. Thank you.
No discussion in the G20 on that.
Mr. Siddharth Upasni, Money Control.
Good evening. Governor, you said that there was recognition of the risks from crypto assets, and now the IMF and the FSB will be developing a synthesis paper. But was you have been vocal against cryptos, and that you've said that they should be banned. Was there any other? Did anyone else from the G20 nations share that view that they should be completely prohibited, and regulation perhaps is not the only way forward?
No, I think a few statements made by, governors and ministers were quoted by the finance minister. So if you just recall them, I think basically they are implying that. And there are multiple views, multiple options are under consideration, but it's too early to speak on what will be the eventual architecture. But yes, to address your questions, there were views that it should be regulated with a view to control its, to check and control its proliferation, to control its risks. There were opinions expressed saying that the option of a ban or prohibition should also be considered. So multiple views were expressed, but this is a work in progress. So let us wait for the discussions to go forward, and we will see how it shapes up. in any case, ultimately, every country is a sovereign country. The countries will take their decisions. But once something is agreed in the G20, naturally it would be expected that countries would, by and large, follow that, whatever is the agreed position.
Ms. Ruchi Bhatia, Bloomberg.
Good evening, ma'am. I want to first begin by asking you on the fact that India was one of the first countries to provide assurances for debt relief for Sri Lanka. Just wanted to understand how soon can we expect assurances to come in from China as well. There was some sort of consensus that we were able to come to as far as the debt talks are concerned. Does that mean that we will see a resolution for Sri Lanka very soon? And my second question, China being one of the biggest bilateral creditors to developing countries, there was also several nations asking China to disclose their debts that they own, that they have for various countries and be transparent about it. Was there any resolution to that matter?
On Sri Lanka, we can only hope that it can get sorted out at the earliest. And on the second issue, nothing was discussed specifically.
Mr. D.G. Vijay from DNS.
Good evening. I wish to congratulate you on behalf of Bangaloreans for making this event a grand success. Thank you.
Thank you.
And my question is related to India's trade with Russia has shot up post the Russia-Ukraine war. According to Reuters, imports of the top 5 principal commodities have increased since the war, as India imported these commodities at discounts. India also benefits from the fact that its refineries are best suited to process Russian oil. Does the ongoing war pose any problem in near future when the war scale is enlarged?
Well, I think we are looking at India's interest and importing, and that will continue.
Mr. Kento Yamamoto from the NHK Japan Broadcasting Corporation. It's not there then. Ms. Sakshi Jain from the Deccan Herald. Oh, he's here. He's here.
This is Kento Yamamoto from Japan Broadcasting Corporation. And would you elaborate on what was the most difficult part on the discussions about the communique?
The discussions on the communique?
Yes, about the communique. What was the most difficult part?
What is it that you want to know? There's always discussion. There have been discussions for 3 full days. On which aspect are you asking us?
Oh, I'm asking about since there was some discussions about the paragraph 3 and 4, and what was the most difficult part about discussions?
Ajay?
So in terms of what all was discussed, there were issues around MDBs, how MDBs can be reformed. There was issues around MDBs. At the same time, there were discussions about debt relief. There were discussions about financing cities of tomorrow. There were discussions about international taxation. Again, so difficult one was on the debt resolution and on, I'll say debt resolution. And the discussions around para 3 and 4 was a position taken by 2 countries. So in terms of discussion, there was not much discussion around that, but the most challenging one was number 1 on the debt, second was on the climate issues, on the climate financing issues.
Ms. Leila Nathu from the BBC. Now, last 2 questions, please.
Good evening, Madam FM. I have one question, just a brief one for clarity, please. In the reference in paragraph 3 of the Chair's statement, was India included in the reference to most members who strongly condemned the war in Ukraine?
If you don't mind, I'd like you to repeat your question a bit more louder.
Just one brief question for clarity first, please. In paragraph 3 of the Chair's statement, was India included in the reference to most members who strongly condemned the war in Ukraine?
Do you want to answer that? We agreed to... see, one thing is clear. Paragraph 3 and 4 are taken from the Bali Leaders Summit's communique.
But would India include itself in that reference to most members?
Well, if you want to answer it? We have agreed to the Bali's communique. So what is that specifically which differentiates India out of it? The Bali Leaders communique, we were a party to.
Okay.
We've taken these 2 paragraphs from there. So by implication, what does that mean?
Okay, can I just add,
No, just one, please. Let's have
that was just
other
a point of
questions also.
clarification. Just further, at the start of these discussions, India urged delegates to focus on the world's most vulnerable citizens. Are you disappointed that some of the focus turned to the war in Ukraine and that some countries like the UK and US came here with very strong messages about the war instead?
Discussions inside happened in a very cordial atmosphere. That should answer you.
Mr. Parikshit Luthra, CNBC TV 18. Yeah.
Ma'am, considering that the war is still on and many of the leaders have expressed that this year there is a lot of uncertainty about inflation, about global growth, did you also urge finance ministers to have greater coordination between governments, between central banks, greater communication clarity to avoid sudden moves in the global economy?
There was nothing specifically, but remotely, many of us would have said something to say that there should be global coordination, but nothing more specific than that.
Yeah, one. Shivangi from the Reuters, if you have a quick question, last question.
Yeah, hi. My question is indeed quick. Can I go ahead?
Shivangi from the Reuters.
Ask your question.
Last question, please.
Yeah, quick question. As the G20 president, was it hectic or not to discuss, pursue issues such as the Russia-Ukraine war with a bloc which is clearly a divided house?
Again, please repeat the question.
As the president of the G20, was it hectic or not to pursue conversations such as the Russia-Ukraine war with a bloc that was clearly divided?
Hectic. It's been hectic for almost now 2 months in preparation for this. So hectic because of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.